YouTube, behind the scenes, always encourages creators to try and hook their audience by different means. Tell a story but don't tell the whole story. Ask loads of questions but don't answer them until the very end, that kind of thing, if one ever gets an answer at all. I, on the contrary, don't bother doing what YouTube says at all and just make films of me working. So if you're not interested, leave now. Although this film was released a few years ago, I decided to re-record a voiceover for it because the soundtrack was very poor and I'd like to make other comments about it. This is my father's house. I was visiting him and he asked me if I could repair some damage on the stairs which have been suffering from woodworm. Now these are Georgian stairs, as you can see by the details there on the posts, but the house is much older. It's a house from, well, it's a 500-year-old house in fact, I think. I did some restoration work for him on the gable of the oldest part of the building, jacking it up and changing out some of the oak. So there's plenty of oak around. So although this wood is made from sycamore, I'm going to do the repair with oak because that's what's available. Please do realise that doing repairs on stairs is very difficult because the strength of the repair has to be such that people can walk on it safely without it breaking. So if you're in any doubt whatsoever, get someone in to help you do a repair like this. It's not really the kind of job that you should do unless you're very experienced. It would be safer to change the whole step than to do this kind of repair that I'm showing here. But as you might have seen some of my films, I'm quite experienced and I know what I'm doing, so this repair was strong. Of course, I'm using my dad's tools, which are not professional tools. They're not necessarily safe. That circle saw that we just saw had the guard wired open, so it's really very dangerous. So I had to be concentrate very clearly, which I generally do when I'm using very dangerous saws. Hypervigilance really is the best insurance against making little mistakes that could end up with you cutting your fingers off. But not so from the mallet. But that really can't do much damage, can it? I pulled out nails there. They seem to be horseshoe nails. This village is near the border between England and Wales. After the Black Death, prosperity increased in this village due to the burgeoning wool trade, and a lot of the buildings in this village are built at that time. But I've got a sneaking suspicion that this one was actually built a little bit before that time. Maybe even, well, who knows. There was a discussion about it at the time. And this oldest part that we see in the next picture, I think was, it seemed like it had been weathered, as if it had had no roof for a long time. So it's a hodgepodge building with lots of building stages. A definite one done in the 1600s, and then again in the 1700s, and then there's also one there that's done around 1900. That's the gable that I repaired. I'm afraid I only have this low-resolution copy of this film. The original footage is lost, together with a lot of my earlier films, after a hard disk failure. This will just go in here and be glued on, perhaps screwed as well. That'll have to be tidied up, that mark there. To be planed back or cut back again with the fane saw and a multi-tool. So with a strong glue against that surface there, and pressed fixing points the same as the old ones. Should be strong enough, like that one. Although that one didn't have any fixtures that went straight in, because that's an angled cut on that one, beveled. So although this one's straight, there's more wood over the fulcrum point, so it's not so difficult to get a good strong repair. I mark with a single line. If it's correct, it stays. If it's wrong, I do another one. I don't mark with more than one line if I can help it. And this, I've used polyurethane glue to fix these parts together, which is half of the fixing and the other half is the screws. The two combined are really a very strong way of doing it.
So 60 or 70 centimetres long, 6 wide. There'll be a bevel here somewhere. Afterwards, I'm going to use a circle saw. I'm going to get that now. Dad, what have you been doing while I've been fixing the stairs?
Well, I'm making cheese cornish pasties.
And how do you know how to make cornish pasties?
Well, because my family comes from Cornwall.
So you used to eat them as...
always had cornish pasties. Of course, in those days, we used to have meat ones. Beef skirt was the favoured meat, because they're incredibly economical. You use very little vegetables, so it's onion, swede, which down in Cornwall people tend to call turnip, and potato, swede and onion. That's it. So simple. And so you roll out the pastry. A mess there. Into something approaching a circle. In this case, I'm putting the pastry straight onto the foil, so they don't have to lift up the pasty. So this is my ingredients. Okay, so there's the ingredients. Now I'm going to put a little more salt than people might think is wise. And then I've got some mixed herbs here. Herbe de Provence. Then I've got some cheese, which I've already cubed up. So I just put little bits of cheese, not a lot. As I say, it's very economical. And butter, to give it a bit of a fat content. So I left the butter in strips like that. There we are. And then we need a little bit of water.
So if you were doing meat, that water would steam the meat, would it?
Well, it is like a little pressure cooker. You are steaming the vegetables and everything in the pie. So there we are. I've just wet that. Put those together. Now that's ready to crimp. Now just wet that edge a bit. There we are. So I'm crimping.
Oh, you're kind of turning it over. So it's important that that's actually airtight then, isn't it?
Well, it is, but you do actually pierce the pastry. So I've got an egg yolk here. I'm going to paint that egg yolk on there. That'll make it nice and brown, so I can easily pick that up because I put it on the aluminium sheet, so I can easily pick it up.
Very good.
Well, now I'm just going to egg wash the others. And I might just put a little bit of pepper on the outside just for luck. Don't forget to prick them. They're ready for the oven.
Jolly good.
It'll take about an hour.
Oh, jolly good. Well, while that's cooking, I'm going to go and finish the stairs.
Okay.
Give that a little go over with the plane.
This kind of temporary working setup here I'm not unfamiliar with, because I quite often use this way of setting up my stuff on the building site anyway. Just quickly, I know what I need, how much friction I need from the clamp. I don't have to hold it too tight because I'm not taking off too much wood. I just adjust the plane until it takes the light brush off the surface there just to straighten it up. I'm perfectly happy working even without a clamp. I'll do it one-handed sometimes. Just holding the piece of wood in one hand and using the plane in the other. So this isn't the worst way of doing it even. It's great having a vise, but you just simply don't need it really. And it is an extra thing, isn't it? Hassle.
There's a high point just here. Mark of the diagonal cut there. Well, I cut quite a bit larger than that. This also needs to have a bit of planing done on it. Luckily it's a bulge in the middle, which means I can use the small plane. Well, I'll film a bit more when I go off a bit further into the process. There's a nail sticking out here. I don't have a reciprocating saw. I can't get right in to the edge with the tool. I've got the teeth so that it cuts on the pull. I'll just do it slowly by hand. I want it to be right out to the edge. Well, this is a repair, not a restoration. So, I just want it to be strong enough to do the job. Preserve as much of the old house as possible, maybe the new, another in the future. I want to restore this rather than just repair it.
It does look a bit amateur, doesn't it? But I was really just making the most of the tools that are available for me, and I really actually am a professional woodworker. And I do have a lot of films which I've taken of my work working on the building site in Scandinavia where I normally live. So I invite you to have a look at some other films on my channel.
That's not too bad. It's a bit tight at that point there. It seems to be touching the woodwork here. I'm going to put a blade there on the highest point. Trying to get this line here completely parallel all the way down. At least, not necessarily all the way down, but I mean the points that stick out the most, where the gap is the smallest, I want that to be uniform all the way. Then I can cut through on the bevel here. That'll allow us to dab closer.
What I'm trying to describe there, I think you might call a kind of scarfing technique. The one there, that's a scarf joint. I keep on calling it a bevel in the film, but that's not really the right term. I'm not sure of the English terms, you know. I learned to do all of this stuff in Scandinavia, not in England.
Okay. One more along the length.
Cutting between the two boards with the multi-tool there will adjust the two surfaces so that they meet very nicely together. And it's a technique that I've used a lot with timber houses, even on a much larger scale with the chainsaw, but it works very nicely in this situation too. And I choose in my films to leave in the details. I don't cut out these details of struggling with inappropriate working conditions maybe, and not quite the right tools, because I'm trying to demonstrate that if you know the process that you're trying to achieve, the principles of doing the repair, then actually those things are secondary, which tools you use and what your workshop looks like. And that's it doesn't put me off. It doesn't make me think that that it's less valuable, each of these shots. To me, I see these shots and see that there's a lot to learn, both for myself and for others.
That's quite good there.
ready.
Alright, thank you.
Well, that looks good, Lucas.
It's ready to glue now.
That's better than the other idea.
Well, I've put the piece of wood into the where it's going to go, and I'm going to use this screw system here to tighten it up. So it's going to make one sacrificial hole which will have to be filled up. The new piece of wood is slightly thinner than it ought to be really, so I'm going to have to sand down the old a little bit and it'll have to be re-dyed. So I've done doing the dry run and it looks like it's completely tight. It's going to be really good, so I'll glue it now and then let it set, and then I'll do the last of the woodworking when it's dry, plane it and sand it a bit. While the glue is gluing and drying on the staircase,
Let's see if these are done.
meanwhile,
They look pretty good.
after an hour in the oven at whatever it was, a moderate oven was it?
Yeah, started off hot and then turned down.
Oh,
There you go.
lovely. So the people on YouTube can see how they look underneath.
Lovely.
What do you think, Jingo?
So that's the last little review of the work after the gluing was finished the next day. I sanded down the surface, but I didn't do the colour treatment.
Okay, Lucas.
So now the next part of this film is like a kind of bonus part for anybody who's interested in how to do the soap treatment of a Scandinavian floor. This is ubiquitous in Scandinavia, the old way of cleaning floors. And it's kind of fallen a little bit out of fashion, and I've noticed that there's very little information about it on the internet, so I thought I would make this film to show how I clean my floor, and in the film there are some comments that I make about what I know about the subject. Restoring old buildings, it's one of the things that we use.
This is a mix of green soap and water, just enough to make it sprayable.
The sound recording in this film is very low, so you probably have to wear headphones to hear it. I'll make some comments with this overdub if I think it's important what I'm saying.
And I do it with extra green soap because it's very dirty. This floor is this house has had it was built in two stages. There's an older building, which I think this floor is part of, the oldest part of the building, and then there's a kind of newer exterior which you might have seen in some of the other films to do with the ageing of walls, untreated walls. Something like the untreated walls of Norway, or what happens when walls are untreated, something like that. That second part was done in 1932, but this first part, I think, was sometime at the end of the 1800s, maybe as early as 1880. So it was 100 years in 1918, and for some years, probably from the middle of the 70s, it was covered, this floor. And when I bought this house in 2002 or 2001, I can't remember which, I took out the covering that was here. It was a kind of vinyl covering, maybe with some concrete to make it flat. The typical improvement, I suppose you could say, in inverted commas, of the 1970s and 80s. I think that perhaps these kind of rustic buildings were a little bit low, perhaps a little bit low status. There are certain downsides to having an untreated floor like this, or a soap treated floor rather than a not completely untreated, of course. The wear, it wears quite quickly, I suppose. I mean, it's not that quickly. I mean, there's still plenty of floor here after over 100 years. But you do get splinters in your feet from it if you don't wear slippers of some kind. But there are plus points which are really quite considerable, and one that I think is the most beneficial is the fact that it's with bare feet. It's warm underfoot. If you paint the floor, you stop the reflective properties of the untreated wood that reflect heat, and it makes them immediately feel much colder, because the paint doesn't do that reflection thing. And so, although the floor actually is physically the same temperature, the way it feels, because of the way it interacts with your own body, changes. So for some reason, I don't know why, untreated wood immediately reflects the heat from the body that's touching it, making it feel warm. Now, I don't wash this floor very often. Just do it with vacuum cleaner. Maybe mop over it sometimes with a wet cloth. But it means that it does get very dirty. But what's interesting about these soap-treated floors is that the dirt sits in the soap. I mean, a lot of people say that you should completely get rid of the soap. After you've washed, you should rinse thoroughly with clean water to get rid of all of the soap, because they say that the soap actually makes the floor more quickly dirty, because it, literally the soap makes, any dirt that's on your feet will kind of almost immediately be glued to the floor. But really, it's kind of, it's true in a sense, but in another sense what happens is that the dirt sits in the soap and not in the wood. If you expose the wood completely with no soap treatment on the surface, no soap in the surface, that dirt might be allowed to absorb into the fibres. Now that doesn't happen just with mud, but it certainly does happen with staining liquids, like red wine, or, I mean, they don't stain for very long, but you know what I mean, it can soak into the wood. And if you have a layer of soap on the wood, even though it's only really tiny, it's only a tiny amount, there's a little bit of fat in this soap, and that's a little bit of that stays on the surface. So it becomes a protective layer, which means that although this floor is very dirty, when I scrub it, it does get a lot of dirt out. The water gets very dark. It does get very clean. I mean, it's as clean as the wood that hasn't been walked on. It looks as clean. There's plenty of damage on this, because I see that people have walked in with studded shoes on and stuff, which only has to happen a couple of times before you're absolutely covered in little pot marks from the studs. And high-heeled shoes, of course, they make marks. It's a softish wood. It's
doesn't have the same strength as an oak floor or something, but I mean, even oak floors suffer from people wearing inappropriate footwear. So. Okay, so there we go. You've seen this being washed, and you can see the water is getting dirty. I mean, this floor has big gaps in between, and they fill up with earth, basically, or particles and stuff. So I mean, it's not the most hygienic of floors in that sense. But then the soap also kills bacteria. I mean, bacteria and viruses and stuff, when they get in a soapy environment, they just fall apart. At a molecular level, they fall apart. So that's why it kills germs, stuff like soaps, because the soaps, the germs need a certain amount of surface tension in order to hold themselves up, so to speak. Now that's about as much as I know about that subject. So I mean, something can look like it's got sand in it or earth in it and stuff, and you might think that that's immediately because of that, for that reason, dirty. But if it's sterile, and there isn't anything living in it, then it's not really dirty. It just looks dirty. I mean, it's kind of dirt. What does it matter? It's not harmful. That's the point. And I remember once when I was working in a kitchen once, and they were changing in those days to plastic cutting boards with the idea that they were more hygienic than the old wooden ones that had always been used before. But then later it turned out that the wood was actually actively killing the germs. Something about the wood that the germs didn't allow them to survive, and actually the plastic, in contrast, was actually encouraging the growth of the germs. So, really, it is fantastic to be able to use a bit more of a scientific process when you're working out stuff like this, which I haven't done, so I don't really know the ins and outs of it. I've looked to see what else has been written about green soap, and there's very little. But one thing is for sure is that the what we call the Riksantikvarene, the state antiquarian, people who are Norway's cutting edge when it comes to restoring and preserving ancient and valuable buildings and objects, the people that are the custodians of the material culture of Norway, and very influential internationally, they say that green soap is harmless to the wood, doesn't destroy the fibres or the lignin that holds the fibres together, and although they say that too much washing isn't a good thing for old buildings because it wears them down, or old objects, green soap is what they recommend for untreated wooden floors as a cleaning soap, if it needs it. Obviously they recommend to do as little as possible. If it just needs vacuum cleaning, then that's what we should do. And that's worth thinking about. This is the kitchen, so it's quite nice to have a floor that's clean enough to drop food on, be able to pick up again, I think. And it's good to know that it isn't absolutely streaming with things that are bad for you. But obviously we're made to have to tolerate a certain amount of dirt, and maybe if you take all of that dirt away, you end up sick yourself. Alright, so at the moment this is wet, and I'm going to film a little bit when it's dried out again, okay? A bit later, maybe tomorrow. You can see the difference, and I'll leave this bit dirty here so you can see the difference. The bit that's in front there actually is already cleaned, so you can see what it looks like when it dries out. It has this nice kind of silvery colour. It's traditional in Scandinavia, this soap system, and I noticed on the bottle of the product producer saying that they've been making that since 1919, but I think it's probably much older than that because it's one of those soaps that's made from plant oils. I mean, they used to use pig fat as well to make soaps. Again, I don't really know, I'm not going to comment on the chemistry of it because maybe someone can comment in the comments about the chemistry because yeah, there's certainly a lot of chemistry going on when it comes to making soap and cleaning. But this is never going to give you anything other than a really rustic look, and that's absolutely fine for me. I like that. I always loved going to the museums in Norway where they had these 100 and 200 year old untreated wooden floors, and I just thought that it looked great. And it does need a little bit of work. It's maybe a little bit more work than a modern floor, and you just kind of have to live with that. Thanks very much. Check out other films. I've got some films making a Viking ship, a kind of authentic Viking ship that I've been volunteering to help make, and of course the films about restoring old buildings. There's plenty of those. Thank you for watching. Bye bye. Well, the washing machine has stopped now, the dishwasher, which was making all that noise in the background, which is quite nice. I can turn up the volume a bit if I need to. There's a bit that's still wet there. Look, I did a second go. Under the cooker there, that's where a lot of cooking oil gets spilt on the floor, you know, over the years. So that has actually soaked into the wood a little bit, and it kind of demonstrates really clearly this thing of the soap protecting the wood. Specifically there it hasn't. Presumably we've spilled oil and it's had a chance to soak in before we've really got it all away. And that's happened probably more than once. So that shows clearly the colour change between wet and dry. Right in front of the fire there is where the wood has taken the most damage. You know, people have been crouching down there, putting wood into that fire for over 100 years, and there the wood is so worn down that we're right down to the what's called the Nultofjær in Norwegian, what's it called? I don't know quite what it's called in English, where the kind of tenon goes into the mortise along the line of the wood. So that says like 8 or 9 millimetres of wear. There's that beautiful silver look, nice and clear. And then there's a bit I just washed. Now there are some little, let's focus that, there are some little bits in the corner there where it hasn't gone silvery like that, and that's because there's still a little bit of the old linseed oil paint or some kind of varnish perhaps that was been taken away again there. That stops the silvering effect. If you have a varnish on a floor, it won't silver, it'll stay yellow. You can use this soap for doing varnished floors, but I don't know if that's, I think they're probably better products than green soap for that. In this shot now you can see the dried out, how it looks when it's dry, and it's really clear the difference between the bit that's been cleaned and the bit that hasn't been cleaned. Now, the last time I washed this floor was probably about 5 months ago, something like that. And I actually use my shoes. Most people don't use shoes in Scandinavia, but I do because I'm English and we always used to use shoes in my house. I grew up in a house with stone floors that were straight down onto the earth floors. And so I find it very hard to get into the habit of putting on indoor shoes, although I am wearing them now. You might have noticed that I had kind of socks on. Actually my socks are covering a pair of Viking shoes, which are kind of leather, and I put the socks on, and that's for going out on the ice. It's also warmer, so I can walk on ice with those. If you don't wear ice, if you don't wear something like that, you just slip all over the place wearing leather soles. Alright, there we go. Don't forget the other films. Like and subscribe. Yes, thank you very much. Bye bye.